He was the man the world adored. The face that lit up television screens, the hero who carried Hollywood's biggest blockbusters on his shoulders, the family man who seemed to embody success, charm, and resilience. For decades, Will Smith wasn't just a movie star, he was a global symbol of charisma, positivity, and unstoppable talent. But fame has a way of hiding the fractures beneath the surface. As audiences cheered and critics hailed his every performance, something was shifting, a pressure building, a storm quietly gathering around the image he had worked his entire life to perfect. And then, in one shocking moment, it all came crashing down. This is not just the story of a man at the peak of his fame. It is the story of how the brightest star in Hollywood can fall and how quickly admiration can turn into disbelief. This is the total collapse of Will Smith's career. For years, Will Smith was untouchable. From the music charts to the silver screen, he conquered every stage he stepped on. He wasn't just a rapper turned actor, he was a phenomenon. A young man from West Philadelphia who transformed himself into one of the most bankable names the world had ever seen. His life seemed like the perfect Hollywood script, a string of box office hits, a picture-perfect family, awards, respect, and influence that stretched far beyond the entertainment industry. But what makes this story so compelling is that it wasn't one single mistake that brought it all crashing down. It was a series of choices, controversies, and cultural shifts that slowly eroded the foundation of his empire. The collapse of Will Smith's career wasn't sudden. It was gradual, almost invisible at first, hidden behind the bright lights of fame and the smiles on red carpets. Yet the warning signs were there, if anyone dared to look closely. The blockbuster flops that dented his once flawless reputation, the interviews that revealed glimpses of a man under immense pressure, the cracks in the carefully constructed image of Hollywood's golden family. And then, the night that stunned the world, the moment that turned a celebrated career into a cautionary tale. So, how did it happen? How did one of the most loved, most admired, and most influential figures in popular culture become a subject of ridicule, controversy, and distrust? Was it the relentless pressure of fame, the changing expectations of audiences, or something much more personal? Tonight, we examine the rise, the unraveling, and the total collapse of Will Smith's career. A story that reminds us that even the brightest stars can fall, and sometimes they fall harder than anyone could imagine. As you listen to this shocking video of Will Smith's collapsed career, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this wonderful channel as encouragement for more in-depth knowledge videos of this type.
Long before the scandals, before the headlines, before the world saw a different side of him, Will Smith was every dreamer's fantasy fulfilled. A kid from the streets of West Philadelphia, born in 1968, growing up in a modest home with big ambitions, he found his first escape through music. With his friend DJ Jazzy Jeff, he wasn't just making songs, he was creating a soundtrack for a generation. Carefree, family-friendly rap that parents didn't fear and kids couldn't get enough of. In an era where hip-hop was often painted as dangerous or rebellious, Will Smith made it approachable, safe, even charming. It was this ability to be accessible without ever losing his cool that set him apart from the very beginning. By the late 1980s, he had already carved out a place in the culture. Grammy wins, platinum records, sold-out shows. His music career seemed unstoppable. And then came the moment that would change everything: television. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, what started as a quirky sitcom, became a cultural phenomenon. Audiences didn't just laugh at his antics, they embraced him. They invited him into their living rooms week after week. For millions of families across America and around the world, Will Smith wasn't just a character on a screen. He was a reflection of fun, youth, and possibility. The show wasn't just entertainment, it was a launching pad, catapulting him from a rapper turned actor to a household name. But Smith didn't stop there. He wasn't satisfied with being just another television star. He had his eyes set on something bigger, the movies. And when he stepped into Hollywood, he didn't just enter quietly, he dominated. Bad Boys in 1995 showed audiences a tougher, sharper side of him, blending action with his signature humor. A year later, Independence Day shattered records and cemented him as a true leading man. Suddenly, studios didn't just want Will Smith, they needed him. He was the man who could guarantee box office gold, the face who could carry a summer blockbuster on his own. And then came Men in Black. With its mix of comedy, science fiction, and adventure, it showcased everything that made him unique: charm, relatability, and that magnetic screen presence no one could ignore. By the late 1990s, Will Smith wasn't just a star, he was Hollywood's brightest flame, earning the title of Mr. July because every summer release with his name attached turned into a global event. He had cracked a code very few could master. He appealed to everyone. Young or old, black or white, American or international, Will Smith was universal. Behind the scenes, his ambition was relentless. He studied box office trends. He paid attention to audience tastes. He calculated every move. Will Smith wasn't stumbling into success. He was engineering it. Every role, every public appearance, every interview was part of a grand design to position himself as the most bankable star in the world. And for years, it worked flawlessly. But with every carefully planned step upward came pressure. The higher the climb, the steeper the fall if things went wrong. And while fans around the world cheered his rise, very few realized the cost of carrying such a flawless image. Because even at the height of his power, even when his smile seemed to radiate absolute confidence, something was waiting in the shadows. Something that no amount of charm, money, or strategy could control. The seeds of collapse had already been planted, even as Will Smith appeared unstoppable. By the dawn of the 2000s, Will Smith had become more than a star. He was an institution. His name alone guaranteed a movie's success. He wasn't just box office gold, he was considered one of the most likable, most reliable celebrities in the world. Critics praised his energy, audiences adored his charisma, and Hollywood executives trusted him with their biggest budgets. In a world full of fleeting fame, Will Smith seemed permanent, unshakable. But behind that bright, unbreakable image, another story was unfolding, one far less glamorous. Because when you become the symbol of perfection, you no longer belong to yourself, you belong to the world's expectations. Every smile has to be genuine, every word has to be measured, every move has to be flawless. And Will Smith had built his entire career on that very foundation, the man who could do no wrong. He wasn't just selling movies, he was selling an idea. The idea of the perfect star, the perfect husband, the perfect father. Alongside Jada Pinkett Smith, his wife since 1997, they became Hollywood's power couple, a family so admired that magazines called them royalty. Their children, Jaden and Willow, would grow up under the spotlight, each step of their lives, carefully observed, often celebrated as the next generation of talent. To the public eye, the Smiths were a dynasty, a symbol of unity, discipline, and modern success. But perfection, once it becomes your brand, becomes impossible to maintain. Every little crack becomes visible. Every stumble becomes magnified. While the cameras flashed on red carpets, while the smiles and carefully curated images painted a portrait of harmony, the pressure inside that household, and on Will himself, was immense. The demands of Hollywood only added fuel to that pressure. Year after year, he had to deliver the biggest movie, the biggest paycheck, the biggest performance. A single box office miss could be explained away, but a string of them? That could threaten the entire empire he had spent decades building. And he knew this. He studied numbers, obsessed over scripts, analyzed the careers of others who had fallen. He admitted, in interviews, that he feared failure more than anything. To him, success wasn't just about fame, it was survival. But the more carefully he tried to control his image, the more it seemed to slip away. In Hollywood, audiences love a hero, but they also grow restless with perfection. They begin to crave authenticity, vulnerability, flaws. And Will Smith, the man who built himself into the perfect superstar, couldn't afford to show weakness, at least not yet. Psychologists often say that the pressure to maintain a flawless identity can be more destructive than failure itself. because it forces a person to live inside a mask, to bury every doubt, every insecurity, every crack in the armor. For Will Smith, that mask would begin to grow heavier with every passing year. The pressure to always be in control, always be admired, always be the hero, it was a weight even he couldn't carry forever. And while his reign at the top seemed unstoppable, beneath the surface, the first signs of trouble were starting to appear. Movie choices that didn't connect, critics who began to question whether his roles were all blending into the same performance, whispers in the media about whether his carefully constructed family image was too good to be true. To the outside world, it still looked like Will Smith had everything, but to those watching closely, the cracks were widening, and soon, the world would see just how fragile that perfect image really was.
For every superstar, there comes a moment when the shine begins to fade. For Will Smith, those moments arrived quietly at first. A few questionable choices, a few disappointments that didn't seem catastrophic on their own. But together, they began to whisper a truth that no one wanted to admit. The invincible star wasn't invincible after all. In 1999, Will Smith took on Wild Wild West, a big-budget steampunk western that was supposed to be his next massive summer hit. On paper, it had everything: action, comedy, spectacle. But when the film hit theaters, it collapsed under its own weight. Critics called it hollow, audiences shrugged, and the soundtrack, which he had proudly recorded, ended up being more memorable than the movie itself. For the first time, Will Smith's golden touch had failed. Still, his name was so powerful that Hollywood forgave him. His next projects, Ali, iRobot, Hitch, restored his shine, proving that even a stumble couldn't stop him. But with each misstep, the pressure grew heavier. He could afford a flop, but he couldn't afford too many. Then came After Earth in 2013. It wasn't just another movie. It was a passion project, a science fiction epic he made with his son, Jaden, meant to launch the next chapter of the Smith dynasty. But the film was savaged by critics, mocked by audiences, and ridiculed online. For the first time, Will Smith's carefully constructed image wasn't just dented, it was attacked. The movie became a symbol of Hollywood arrogance, of a star trying too hard to build an empire around his family. And the ridicule didn't stop when the film left theaters. The memes, the jokes, the online commentary, they lingered, turning into a narrative that Will Smith was no longer the untouchable king of Hollywood, but a desperate star clinging to control. It wasn't just about the films. The culture itself was shifting. Audiences were no longer satisfied with the old formula, big-budget blockbusters carried by a charming lead. They wanted realism, vulnerability, complexity, and Will Smith, who had built his empire on being the larger-than-life hero, suddenly seemed out of step with the times. His calculated choices, his obsession with box office dominance, began to feel manufactured in an era that demanded authenticity. Psychologists often describe this stage of decline as the erosion phase. It's not a collapse, not yet, but it's the moment when the foundation begins to weaken. For Will Smith, the foundation was his promise to audiences that he could always deliver, always entertain, always win. But with every disappointment, that promise grew harder to believe. And while he still had hits, Suicide Squad, Aladdin, even those successes came with caveats. Critics were lukewarm, fans were divided, and the conversation was no longer about his brilliance, but about whether his best days were behind him. For a man who had once been unstoppable, the question was unthinkable. Was Will Smith losing his grip? But these career missteps, damaging as they were only one part of the story. Because while Hollywood was still debating his box office appeal, another battlefield was opening, one far more personal, far more public, and far more devastating than any bad review. And soon, the world would see that the cracks in Will Smith's career weren't just professional, they were deeply personal, and those personal battles would spill out in front of millions, reshaping his legacy forever. For years, Will and Jada Pinkett Smith were the embodiment of Hollywood's golden couple. To the outside world, they seemed untouchable, glamorous, powerful, united. They raised their children in the spotlight, crafted an image of a modern family who could balance fame with stability, and built an empire on love, loyalty, and mutual respect. Together, they projected an aura of strength. But in Hollywood, appearances are often just that, appearances. And what the world didn't see was the strain hidden behind those smiles. By the late 2019, rumors about their marriage began to swirl more aggressively. Whispered stories of unconventional arrangements, speculation about infidelity, and endless tabloid headlines made them the subject of constant gossip. Both Will and Jada would occasionally address these rumors, often brushing them aside, but the public had already formed its own narrative. Their family, once seen as the perfect blueprint for success, was being dissected under a microscope. And for the first time, people began to question whether the image was real. Then came the moment that shifted everything into the spotlight. Jada's Red Table Talk. In 2020, the world watched as she and Will sat across from each other on a small, red table, opening up about what she famously called an entanglement with singer Algis Olsen. For some, it was raw honesty. For others, it was humiliation. The memes flooded the internet. Screenshots of Will's expression, stoic, hurt, seemingly broken, spread like wildfire. It became a cultural moment, one that millions couldn't stop replaying, analyzing, mocking. For a man who had spent decades carefully curating the image of strength, control, and perfection, this was a devastating blow. Suddenly, Will Smith wasn't just the leading man of Hollywood, he was the husband being pitied, the man being laughed at, the celebrity whose private struggles had become public entertainment. The respect that once came so easily now seemed fragile, vulnerable. And yet, even as the storm of ridicule raged around him, he continued to push forward. He released videos, offered glimpses of his personal life on social media, tried to lean into authenticity. But the damage was done. The world no longer saw him as the flawless superstar. They saw him as a man under pressure, a man mocked by the very audience that once adored him. This is the cruel paradox of fame. The higher you climb, the more brutal the fall when the mask slips. And for Will Smith, that mask was slipping faster than ever. What had started as whispers about his marriage was now a global conversation, a punchline repeated across every corner of the internet. But if the Red Table Talk was the crack that shook the image, what came next was the explosion that shattered it completely. Because on one night, under the brightest lights of his career, Will Smith would make a decision that stunned the world, a decision that turned decades of admiration into one of the most controversial moments in entertainment history. The night of the Oscars, the night that changed everything. March 27th, 2022, the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles. The biggest night in Hollywood, the Academy Awards. For Will Smith, it was supposed to be a crowning achievement. He was the frontrunner to win Best Actor for his role in King Richard, a film that had already earned him critical acclaim. After decades of chasing validation from the industry, this was the moment he had dreamed of, the moment that would cement his place among the legends. The night began like so many others. Celebrities filled the red carpet, interviews buzzed with anticipation, and the cameras flashed with the glamour of Hollywood at its peak. But as the show went on, the world witnessed something no one could have predicted, a moment that would overshadow not only the awards, but Will Smith's entire legacy. Comedian Chris Rock took the stage to present an award. Known for his sharp wit and playful jabs, he directed a joke toward Jada Pinkett Smith, comparing her shaved head, caused by her struggle with alopecia, to a character in G.I. Jane. The audience laughed, but Jada's expression told another story, a flash of discomfort, a moment of pain. And sitting beside her, Will Smith reacted. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but changed everything. Will Smith stood up, walked across the stage, and in front of millions watching live around the world, struck Chris Rock across the face. The sound of the slap echoed in the theater. For a brief moment, the audience thought it might be staged, but then came the words, sharp, unfiltered, filled with fury. "Keep my wife's name out your mouth." Repeated, louder the second time. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a joke. This was real. The theater fell silent. Viewers at home sat frozen. For the first time in Oscar history, the world wasn't talking about the awards. They were talking about an act of violence broadcast live on global television. The man who had built a career on charm, on positivity, on being the approachable, family-friendly superstar, had stunned the world with a single act of rage. In that moment, years of pressure, ridicule, and bottled emotions seemed to erupt in front of millions of audiences. Psychologists would later describe it as a breaking point, an emotional snap triggered by years of suppressed anger and insecurity. But explanations didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was what the world saw: Will Smith striking another man live on stage at the most prestigious event in Hollywood. And then came the cruel irony. Just minutes later, he won the award he had waited for his entire life: Best Actor. As he took the stage, tears streamed down his face. His acceptance speech was filled with apologies, explanations, and the image of a man torn between triumph and disgrace. He spoke of love, of protecting family, of wanting to spread positivity, but the world wasn't listening to his words. They were still replaying the slap over and over again. It was supposed to be his greatest night. Instead, it became the night that defined him in an entirely different way. Because when the camera stopped rolling, when the music faded, when the applause died down, the questions began. How could Will Smith, the hero, the superstar, the role model, lose control so completely? And what would the consequences be? The Oscar slap was not just a scandal, it was a turning point. In a single moment, decades of admiration crumbled. The man who had once symbolized success and positivity was now a symbol of controversy, a case study in how quickly a career can collapse under the weight of one public mistake. But as shocking as the slap was, the aftermath proved even more devastating. Because while Hollywood has forgiven many scandals in the past, the fallout from this moment would follow Will Smith into every corner of his career, threatening everything he had built and everything he still hoped to achieve. The slap lasted only seconds, but its aftermath would haunt Will Smith for years. In the days and weeks that followed, the man once hailed as Hollywood's golden child found himself at the center of a cultural firestorm. The world had watched him win the highest honor of his career and lose his reputation in the very same night. At first, there was confusion. Some defended him, citing years of ridicule about his family, the pain of watching his wife mocked in front of millions, the human impulse to protect the person you love. Others condemned him outright, saying nothing could justify violence on the biggest stage in entertainment. The debate was fierce, but the damage was undeniable. Will Smith's carefully constructed image, the flawless superstar, the unshakable role model, had shattered. The Academy moved quickly. He was banned from attending the Oscars for 10 years. His resignation from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences followed soon after. For a man who had spent decades chasing respect from that very institution, it was an extraordinary fall from grace. The golden boy of Hollywood was now persona non grata at its most prestigious event. But the professional consequences went even further. Studios that had lined up projects with Will Smith suddenly went silent. Films already in development, Bad Boys 4, Bright 2, even Netflix blockbusters were delayed, paused, or quietly shelved. The actor once considered a guaranteed box office draw had become a liability. Hollywood doesn't like unpredictability, and after the slap, Will Smith had become unpredictable.
And then came the public reaction. The memes, the late-night jokes, the endless replays of that one shocking moment.
The same internet that had once celebrated his motivational speeches and family-friendly persona now turned him into a symbol of failure. Hashtags trended. Think pieces flooded the media. Was this a career-ending mistake? Or would Hollywood, with its short memory and history of forgiving scandals, eventually welcome him back? What made this fallout so devastating was the contrast. Will Smith wasn't just any celebrity. He wasn't known for scandals, for recklessness, for chaos. He was known for being safe, dependable, likable. His entire career had been built on the foundation of trust. Audiences trusted him to make them laugh, to inspire them, to embody the best of what a Hollywood star could be. And in one night, that trust was broken. Psychologists call this the betrayal effect. When someone admired for stability suddenly breaks that expectation, the reaction is harsher than if the same act had been committed by someone with a reputation for controversy. Fans didn't just feel shocked by Will Smith's actions, they felt betrayed. And betrayal is difficult to repair. Hollywood insiders began whispering, was Will Smith finished? Could he ever recover? Or had the Oscar slap become his defining legacy, overshadowing decades of hard work? For Will Smith, the nightmare wasn't just that he had made a mistake, it was that the world refused to let him move past it. Every headline, every interview, every appearance would now circle back to that one night. The collapse of his reputation was no longer just about a single act of violence. It had become a symbol, a cautionary tale. Proof that even the brightest, most admired stars can fall, and when they do, the world doesn't look away. It watches, it judges, it remembers. The fallout was undeniable. Careers have ended for far less. And yet, a lingering question hung in the air. Was this truly the end of Will Smith, or could Hollywood's one-time golden boy find a way back into the spotlight? Some argued that redemption was inevitable. After all, Will Smith wasn't any celebrity. He wasn't a one-hit wonder. His legacy spanned over 30 years of music, television, and film. He had conquered every medium, broken barriers, and rewritten the rules of what a Hollywood star could be. And if anyone had the charisma, the resilience, and the sheer determination to stage a comeback, it was him. But redemption in Hollywood is complicated. It doesn't just depend on talent or past success, it depends on timing, on public forgiveness, on whether audiences are willing to believe in the narrative of redemption. And Will Smith's challenge was unprecedented. His fall had played out not in the tabloids, not in gossip columns, but live in front of millions on a night that was supposed to be the crowning achievement of his career. The image of him striking Chris Rock was burned into cultural memory. Could any number of apologies erase it? Will tried. He issued statements of regret, released emotional videos, spoke of personal reflection and healing. He admitted fault, sought forgiveness, promised to grow. And while some fans accepted his words, others accused him of performing, of treating even his apology like a role to be played. Meanwhile, Hollywood itself hesitated. Studios whispered about his unpredictability. Directors wondered if audiences would trust him again. Executives questioned whether associating with Will Smith meant risking millions in bad press. And for a time, the phone calls stopped. Scripts that once would have been delivered directly to his door now sat on shelves, collecting dust. But beneath the silence, there were signs of a potential comeback. A carefully chosen interview here, a selective appearance there, whispers of projects slowly moving forward again, Netflix testing the waters, Sony suggesting that Bad Boys 4 was still on the table. Small hints that Hollywood, ever pragmatic, might eventually forgive and forget, if it meant profit. And yet, the question remained, would the audience forgive? Because in the end, it wasn't just about executives or studios, it was about the people sitting in theaters, the viewers streaming at home, the millions who had once adored Will Smith. Would they separate the man from the mistake, or had he crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? Some say time heals all wounds, others say certain wounds never fully close. The truth is, Will Smith's career stands at a crossroads. He is neither erased nor restored, neither permanently fallen nor fully redeemed. He is caught in between, a symbol of how fast a reputation can collapse and how uncertain the road back can be. Hollywood has a history of comebacks, from stars who weathered scandals to those who clawed their way back into relevance. But it also has a graveyard of names that never recovered. The question for Will Smith is simple, yet haunting. Which story will he belong to? The story of redemption or the story of ruin? And so we arrive at the final chapter, at least for now. The story of Will Smith is not a simple story of success or failure. It is a story of extraordinary rise, an empire built on charm, discipline, and relentless ambition, and a collapse that came in the blink of an eye on a night meant to crown his legacy. The world watched a man who once seemed untouchable become vulnerable, flawed, human in the harshest way possible. The laughter that once followed him turned to silence. The applause became uncertainty, and the name Will Smith, once synonymous with Hollywood royalty, became a question mark. In one sense, his story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that no matter how high one climbs, no one is immune to downfall. In another sense, it is a reflection of us, of the culture that builds people up only to watch them fall and debate endlessly whether they deserve another chance. The question is not only whether Will Smith can recover, but whether we as an audience even want him to. Do we see him as the Fresh Prince, the hero who carried blockbusters on his shoulders, the father figure millions grew up with? Or do we see him as the man who let one moment define him forever? Perhaps the truth is that his career will, like all careers, not be defined by one night, but by the choices that follow. Time will tell if Will Smith rewrites his story or if his collapse becomes permanent, a turning point from which he never fully returns. Because in Hollywood, redemption is never promised, and sometimes the greatest drama isn't on the big screen, but in the lives of the stars themselves. This has been the story of the total collapse of Will Smith's career. But the final act? That is still unwritten. Thank you for watching. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know in the comments, do you believe Will Smith can make a comeback, or has his time in Hollywood already ended?